This time we're going to go in and we are going to talk about the supply curve. Now, when we were talking about demand, we were talking about it from the consumer's point of view or the buyer's point of view. When we're talking about supply, we're talking about how much sellers are willing and able to sell at various market prices. Now, this becomes a little bit more difficult in dealing with the demand curve because the demand curve we do every day. We know when price goes up, we buy less of the good simply because we're not able to afford it. But when you're talking about the supply curve, remember you're looking at this from the seller's point of view. And most of the time, we go out and we don't think about it from the entrepreneur's point of view. So you have to put on a little bit different hat when you're going in and you're dealing with the supply curve. So here's what we're going to do. Out of brute force intuition, let's go in and let's see how a supplier would go in and react to a change in price. Let's say, for example, that we are the seller of refrigerators and freezers. All right, and as a seller, obviously there's a number of pieces of information we know about our business. Number one, we know the maximum number of units that we have to sell. We know the cost that we gave for those refrigerators and freezers to begin with. We know what our competition is, how much they're selling them for, what our overhead expenses are, such as maybe rent on the building, insurance, utilities, and so on. So there are a number of pieces of information that we have to go and take into account. Let's just assume for the moment that we have a maximum number of 450 refrigerators, a particular type of refrigerator that we can sell. And let's say that that refrigerator cost us, let's say $200 each. And we have 450 of them to sell. Now, when we go in and we look at the supply curve, we would ask ourselves the question, would the seller, let's say the seller is actually facing a price on the market of $300 for each refrigerator. So the question is asked is the seller going to be willing and able to sell a lot of refrigerators way up here or very few refrigerators way down here? And the answer is they're probably going to be willing and able to sell very few. Because the idea is if the seller actually paid $200 per refrigerator and they're only selling them for $300, then that's a net profit of $100, and plus then you also have all the other expenses that have to come off of that, again, like your overhead, insurance, and so on, wages and whatnot. And so therefore you're really not making all that much per refrigerator. So given that, the seller will hang on to some of these refrigerators in a hope that the price will at some point in time go up. Then let's say the price of these refrigerators goes all the way up to $700 per unit. At $700, the seller would be willing and able to sell a lot more of these refrigerators. Let's just say, for an example, at the price of $300, the seller may be willing and able to sell 50 units. Now, the reason they're willing to sell any at all is they have overhead costs. They have to stay in business, pay their telephone bill, electric bill, and their wages, or they're not going to stay in business very long. But you notice now at the price of $700, the profit margin has gone up, and the higher the profit margin is, the more refrigerators this seller is going to be willing to let go. Now, are they going to go in and let go of all 450? Probably not. Let's just say they're willing to go in and sell 200 of those refrigerators at $700 a piece. The idea is the higher the price goes, the more the profit margin goes up, and therefore the more refrigerators the seller would be willing and able to sell. So these two quantities, or this idea of the relationship between price and quantity, is what we call a positive relationship. What that means is the variables, in this case the price and quantity, move in the same direction. The variables of price and quantity move in the same direction. So what we see here is if we start out with a relatively low price of $300, we notice that as the price went up, the quantity supplied, in other words, the quantity that the seller would be willing and able to sell, actually went up as well. If we started at the price of $700, as the price fell from $700 down to $300, then profit margins get squeezed. The seller would not be willing to sell as much as they did before, so therefore the quantity supplied decreases. So that's a positive relationship, and that's why we have an upward slope to our supply curve.